Siddhartha Gautama was a prince about 600 BC. And Gautama was shielded by his father, the king, from any hardships, challenges, problems, death, everything, sickness. He was just shielded from it in this palace. He had everything he ever wanted. And then he grows up and he becomes a teenager and he goes out. Maybe this happened when he was a boy. I'd have to look back at the story. But, you know, he goes out of the palace and he's with one of his, like, handlers, whatever it is that princes have. And he sees sickness. He sees people, you know, homeless folk. He sees just regular street people. He sees people getting sick. And he's like, what's that? And then the guy tells him, his handler's like, that's sickness. And then he sees people marching and walking behind like a funeral pyre. Like in India, what they did traditionally, at least, is they would wrap people, they would put them on like kind of like a hammock, like you'd see like a World War II style hammock, and then they would carry them, and then they would like cremate them, but it was open air cremation, and it's traditional. And, you know, actually that's one of the ways that they've made scientific discoveries. I don't know. That's like a different conversation. But so Gautama sees this and he's like, what's that? Why is that person like wrapped up like that? And his handler says that's death. And so the Gautama is like, what the hell? He's like, what the hell? We die? I didn't know that. Nobody told me. I'm going to sip a coffee before I tell the rest of this story. You wait with bated breath while I sip this coffee for the rest of the story. Delicious. It's not cold. It's not hot, which is my least favorite type of coffee. I want it warm or I want it ice cold. That's suffering. First noble truth of Buddhism. Life is suffering. Deal with it, Rico. So Gautama goes out. And then he comes back to the palace and he's pissed. He's like, Dad, like, well, you didn't tell me any of this. Like, people die, whatever. And his dad, it kind of goes back to the archetypal, like the Oedipal complex, right? Like the smothering mother from a sort of a Jungian archetype approach, where, you know, you want to protect your kids from life, and that's what happened to the Buddha. And the Buddha, Gautama at the time. He's like, I'm out, dude. Like, you guys have been lying to me. I have no idea. I want to go see what the world is. And so he goes out in the world and he lives, like, you know, with like basically in a shirt, no shoes, wandering around. He ends up linking up with a group of meditators, yogis, called the school of thought is asceticism, which is not like aesthetic, like I've cultivated a lovely aesthetic in my yoga or my podcast / office space. That's aesthetic, right? Ascetic is different. An ascetic is they eat like half a bowl of rice a day and they just sit and meditate and chant and throw like dust and fires and watch the fire plume with the dust and like just like intense meditation. And so he goes through that approach and he's not into it. He tries other approaches. He's like, this one doesn't make sense. And then the story goes, which you can approach however you want to, metaphorically, literally, or whatever. Gautama sits underneath the Bodhi tree, which they say, much like in Catholicism, they say like, oh, this is the Shroud of Turin, right? This, or where, you know, this is the shroud that Jesus or Jesus was wrapped in. And so there's all these like historical artifacts in world religions. So they have the Bodhi tree, which I think it's in India. I think it's in northern India, but you can Google that for yourself. It's this tree that's like legit, like a couple thousand years old, and it's a Bodhi tree. And apparently what happened is Gautama sat there in deep meditation. And I think it might have been one of these 40 days and 40 nights things, which I don't understand the like true meaning of 40 days, 40 nights. Cause like Christ was in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. You have, you know, biological processes that work on 40s, and like my wife, when she has her baby, it's supposed to be 40 weeks. So I don't know what 40 means, and I'm not getting hippy dippy on it, but it's interesting to see like connection between those things, between the biological rhythms and the stories and history of spiritual leaders. So he sits there for a handful of days, could have been 40 or 40 nights, not sure. And then he touches the ground. And just by touching the ground, apparently, boom, that's enlightenment. Boom, you're enlightened. And then he walks into town, and they're like, they start calling him the Buddha, which means the enlightened one.